Hello, greetings,
Hello,
greetings,
hello,
greetings.
hello,
Greetings.
hello,
Hello, greetings. I hope you can hear me. If I turn my microphone, if I turn my speaker back on, well, I'm going to have playback, and I don't know uh, how to end that. Um, so here I am, a live YouTube stream, which is something I've never done before. So I well, I'm not sure where I'm going to begin. Uh, so if someone is there, if someone shows up, uh, please send me a chat. Um, so I'm not even sure where going to begin or what I'm going to talk about. Uh, but I made some notes. One of the thoughts that I had about using YouTube was to simply call uh, one of my channels Notebooks, because I have notebooks going back quite a few years, stuff that I wrote, and some of them I can't even remember what my notes mean, but others, excuse me, might be interesting to my listeners. Uh, but let me just start by mentioning some of the projects that I've been working on over the years. Uh, I guess the key word is working. Um, I have friends who say, "Oh, I'm working." Um, I sometimes feel like they're saying that what I do is not work. Uh, but the last thing that I composed, and I'm actually, or, well, somebody said to me, "Well, you are still a composer, even though I haven't written anything in how many years? 17 years." I wrote a processional. It's intended to be an actual processional um, while people are entering the hall. And I don't call them the audience. I call them, well, there's a word for it, but I've forgotten. Uh, and this music is intended to accompany that process as people are entering the hall. And this is the first part of a what's intended to a Wilmington memorial. And this relates to what music is supposed to be all about. So, the people who told us that music is by definition a form of entertainment, they were either misguided or they were deliberately misguiding the rest of us. Uh, One of the fundamental purposes of music is to help people remember, to enable remembering. So, Wilmington, North Carolina, 1898. There was what is called an insurrection and massacre, in which people who were the Trump people of their time, who actually uh, uh, carried out a successful coup. They overthrew the democratically elected government of Wilmington, North Carolina, which I believe at the time was the largest city in North Carolina, down near the on at the southeast coast of North Carolina. They overthrew the democratically elected government, um, and they massacred a large part of the African American population. Now, African Americans were prospering in Wilmington. This should remind you of what happened in Tulsa in 1920 or 1921, African Americans was prospering in Wilmington. They were the professional class that the services that people wanted in that city, they were being performed by the African Americans. Uh, and the government was in the hands of, it was a fusion government, which was a combination of Republicans and others. And in those days, the Republicans were the party of Lincoln. Uh, and looking out for the best interests of African Americans and not just African Americans, but certainly including African Americans. And so the insurrection drove them out, bodies in the river, blood in the river, uh, and that was 1898. And so what I was planning, and Allah willing, I might one day actually complete this project as a piece of music for orchestra with vocal parts, soloist, uh, and myself as a pianist, a soloist on the piano, uh, and about the Wilmington insurrection. So it would give a history of the insurrection and other aspects of that event. So that is one of the projects, and I wrote this processional 17 years ago, and have not seriously completed anything since then. Um, and I guess there's a long story behind that. Another project of mine is the African and African American roots of European classical music. Um, and we have been given a history. You know, it's interesting because one of the reasons I find myself in this predicament is because Harvard University, um, I attended Harvard University, and I became convinced that Harvard University is a scheme. Of course, everybody, every living creature has an agenda. We sometimes use that word as though it's wrong to have an agenda. Every living creature from billions of years ago has an agenda. Uh, if you're alive, you have an agenda. Well, Harvard makes it clear that their purpose is to maintain Western civilization. You remember what Gandhi said when he was asked, what did he think of Western civilization? He said he thought it would be a good idea. In other words, there is no such thing. I was teaching at Fayetteville State University. The last 3 years I was teaching, I deliberately got myself the job of teaching humanities as a part-time adjunct, temporary assistant professor, a part-time adjunct temporary, no, a part-time temporary adjunct assistant professor. So I was teaching 2 courses per semester, but it gave me the freedom to teach as I saw fit. So I actually taught my students that Western civilization is a myth. It's a lie. Uh, what we're talking about, I told them that civilization is a uh, multi-ethnic, international, transcontinental endeavor. We're all working on this together, right? Now, we've been indoctrinated, of course, to think that Europeans, the ancient Greeks and all of this, they established all of this stuff. So there was a man who was the first man to spread the idea that the earth is rotating on its axis. I've tried to make a project of remembering his name, and I can't. At this moment, I can't. It's Artabuta or something like that, a man in India. Okay, so this was not a European. This was a man in India who first taught that everything is not going in a grand circle around the earth, but the earth is turning on its axis. Uh, and so, of course, we should remember his name, just like the name of the man who invented paper. We may be told that paper was invented in China. Now, paper is not papyrus. Papyrus is not the same thing. It's uh, it, well, it's not. Uh, but paper was invented by a man named Tsai Lun. I have memorized his name, Tsai Lun, about 18 and a half, almost 19 centuries ago in China. He invented this. It's an amazing achievement. And one historian counts him as the seventh most influential person in history simply for inventing paper. And, it's interesting. I had some yellow jackets. They built a nest over my door, to the carport. And I lived with them for a couple of months until they started swarming. And then I decided, well, I can't walk through a swarm of yellow jackets. So I went to the hardware store and got some stuff because you can't just spray, fly swatter, fly, that stuff, those creatures will just get angry and sting you, perhaps literally to death. Uh, so I got some wasp killer because they are a species of wasp. And, early in the morning when they're sleeping on their nest, I followed the instructions and saturated the nest, and they all just fell down, boom, just like that, which was gratifying. None of them were swarming around angry or anything. And the instructions were to wait for the nest to dry out. And any of them that came back to the nest while it was still damp, they would die from the poison. Well, after the nest dried out, I went up there and pulled it down. And to my amazement, this yellow jacket nest is made of paper. And what I suspect is that this man, Tsai Lun, 19 centuries ago, may have gotten the idea of making paper from a wasp nest. See, because wasps, they consume plant matter, and then in their bodies, they manufacture paper, and that's how they make their nests. So this is how we make paper. We take plant matter and process it, and it becomes paper. And then paper is not just used for writing; it's used for packaging. Here's a package. It's cardboard. This is paper. And it's used in constructing our houses. It's used in clothing. It's used all over the place. So this is extremely useful. Try to imagine a world without paper. But that's Tsai Lun. But if you look it up, either one or the other two things will happen. Either they'll simply say that paper was invented in China. Oh, the Chinese invented paper. When they're talking about, say, the theory of gravitation, they don't say the theory of gravitation was discovered in England, right? And leave you with that. They give you a man's name, Isaac Newton, right? So, they don't give us the man's name. They don't say Tsai Lun. And then when they do give us the man's name, they say, well, he did something to contribute to the creation of paper. So they downplay it. There's a similar process that happens with the composer, Ludwig van Beethoven. In the definitive biography of Beethoven, written by Alexander Wheelock Thayer, Thayer, Thayer is his last name. That's still to this day, he wrote it in the 19th century. To this day, it is the definitive biography of Beethoven. And in it, he described people who saw Beethoven, describing him as looking like a Moor, a blackamoor, like a black man. And Joseph Haydn was lighter than Beethoven, but he also looked like a blackamoor. But I shared this idea with the friend. I shared it on Facebook, and the friend, a white man, I don't want to insult him, but he's white. One of my classmates from Harvard, and he used the word, what are those words? Meme. There's another word, begins with a T, that have become popular lately. This is a meme, not this is a true fact. Oh, this is a meme. This is something that people are saying, whatnot. No, I mean, Beethoven and a lot of other people in Europe, just a tiny percentage of the population, but still it amounts to quite a few people, just ordinary people walking around, not to mention the people whose names we remember, like Alexander Dumas, who wrote the Three Musketeers, and his son, Alexander Dumas also. who wrote Camille, on which is based operas and movies and plays like the play Rent, based on that originally a novel and then a play by Dumas, the son. And then in Russia, Alexander Pushkin, the father of Russian literature. Alexander Pushkin, the Russians are not hesitant about depicting him as a brown skinned man. His great grandfather, I believe, was named Ibrahim. He was captured and enslaved. He was from where Cameroon is now. And he came into the employ, I will say, of Peter the Great. And Peter the Great put him in charge of the armies. So I don't know what he was doing in Cameroon, but this man was so skilled at commanding armed forces that Peter the Great called him Ibrahim Hannibal. And Hannibal, that's another one. Some Frenchman made a statue in the style of the ancient Romans and said, "This is Hannibal," right? And it looks so distinguished. Now, if you know anything about ancient Rome, and you should know this, the Romans did not honor their enemies, defeated or not. One of the reasons that Cleopatra committed suicide is because she knew she would be paraded down the streets of Rome like a captured animal. And she wasn't going to have that. Hannibal nearly defeated Rome. The Carthaginian Empire, his empire, in which he was one of the commanders, one of the leaders, was an old empire. It was already 2 centuries old, over 2 centuries old, when Rome was still just a city. But Rome rose up and challenged the Carthaginians, and eventually they set their minds to it. Carthage must be destroyed. But in the meantime, Hannibal had marched his army through Spain and up north through what is now France and through the Alps with elephants, through the frigid Alps and down into what is now Italy. And, this was the heart of Rome. And he occupied it for years. And the Romans finally defeated him by cutting off his supplies, the sea routes. And Hannibal had to retreat and flee from the Romans. But this statue looked like a Roman soldier. Oh, so distinguished in everything. So when I saw it, I said, no, this is not right. The Romans wouldn't honor Hannibal with a distinguished looking statue. So, I did some research and discovered that this statue was not done by the Romans. It was done by a Frenchman about 200 years ago or so. It was very popular. The French were into doing things in the classical style, as they call it, and the Roman style and whatnot, their paintings, their sculptures and everything. And so he did it in the Roman style, so it was Hannibal. Well, there are images of Hannibal available. There are coins because this is, Hannibal was established in Italy and they had to have currency. They made coins. And in those days, when you put somebody's image on the coin, that was a form of deification. Like the Romans would put the image of the Romans on their coins, right? And we put the images of our presidents and the founding fathers on our coins, right? We don't call it deification, but, it's a great honor, right? Now, there's a historian that I met at Howard University. I taught there for 1 year. Named Frank Snowden, Snowden. He was teaching at Howard, and he told me that I was only the 3rd African American to get a PhD from Harvard. I may have been the 3rd or the 4th because somehow W.B. Du Bois, his name gets, I don't know, they can't make up their minds. But Frank Snowden, Alain Locke, Alain Locke, Locke, brilliant historian, part of the Harlem Renaissance. Look him up, okay? Frank Snowden wrote a book called Blacks in Antiquity. And even he has the picture of these coins in his book. And there's an image on it of It's amazing because during the you know the 1970s, during the late 60s, 1970s, and we became very black conscious and Africa conscious and everything. We had the hair and and everything, and this is a picture on this coin that looks like somebody from the block. Somebody from the hood, so to speak, or a college student, being very African. And this is Hannibal, but Frank Snowden says it was one of his elephant drivers, one of the men driving the elephant. Well, by the time they got to Italy, only one elephant had survived, and Hannibal was on the elephant. But Frank Snowden says, oh, this was one of the mahouts, Mahout, one of the mahouts driving the elephant. You don't put a chauffeur on a coin. You don't put his image on the coin. That's Hannibal. Okay. So this is black. So this book by Frank Snowden, excellent book, Blacks in Antiquity. So he shows all of these images of black people in Greek and Roman times. And, we don't know, there was a man named Terence, one of the leading playwrights in the Roman times, Terence Affer being African, who was a black African in ancient Rome. But at any rate, I don't even know how I was talking about the African and African American roots of European classical music. I have a timer up here, so I've been talking for what, 20 minutes, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I think I may stop by 30 minutes, okay? But this is one of the subjects, African and African American roots of European classical music. Just to drop a tidbit on you, the chaconne. Bach wrote chaconnes and other composers wrote chaconnes. Many chaconnes are written that don't have the name chaconne. Brahms wrote his Fourth Symphony, the last movement is called the chaconne. All kinds of music written in that period, all the way from before Bach up until the 20th century. The chaconne is very important. The rhythm, the bass line, the harmony, the harmonic progression. This was an Afro-Cuban dance, an Afro-Cuban musical form. The captives, the enslaved captives brought from Africa to what was called New Spain at the time, which is Cuba now, brought that musical form. And the Europeans who were there in Cuba took that musical form back to Spain. Now, the scholars will say that Spanish music has nothing to do with the music of the Moors. Now, the Moors were black Africans, right? They were black Africans when they invaded Spain. And then when they were driven out 8 centuries later, they had intermixed and intermingled with the local population. So they weren't as black when they left as they were originally. So, and they were called Moors in Europe by Europeans. Moor is a European word, okay, for black people. So now you go to Africa, Mauritania, and places like that, and you'll have people who are called Moors. Well, those are descendants of the people who were expelled from Spain. They are not an original, originally from those areas. But in Spain, the great highfalutin scholars will say, oh, the Moors don't have anything to do with Spanish music. But, I've heard from Spanish people, Spain Spanish, that everybody in Spain, all the people know that Spanish music is Moorish music. So if you want to know Moorish music, listen to Ravel. Ravel, a French composer, wrote excellent Spanish music, Bolero. If you can get a hold of Bolero, you can find it, on YouTube, whatnot, get a performance of Bolero. That's Moorish music. Okay, that's Moorish music. That's the music of black people who had ruled in Spain for 800 years. So the chaconne, and it becomes a fundamental. It's not only those specific pieces of music that are directly influenced by the chaconne, but it's elemental. Just like when you build a building, the architecture and everything, it has to stand up, right, and be useful. People have to be able to get into it and get from one part to another, but also it can't just crumble. It just can't fall over. Well, music has architecture as well. You might listen to a piece of music and after a couple of minutes you get bored. Oh, wow. So music has to have something that holds it together, right? And the chaconne is a part of the fundamental structure of how music works, okay? European symphonic music, it's there. The habanera from Carmen, you can find a performance by Leontine Price on YouTube. the habanera from Carmen, that the rhythm is one of the rhythms of the chaconne, okay? And the descending melodic line, ba-dum, bum, ba-bum, ba-dum, bum, bum, that's the descending melodic line of the chaconne. Normally, it would be in the bass, but in the habanera from Carmen, habanera means from Havana, Cuba. Okay. So anyway, the African American roots of European classical music. Um, I want to talk about the symphonic structure of the Quran. We're talking about the Arabic Quran. This is a book that, it says over and over in the Quran. I happen to believe that the Quran actually comes from the one who created the entire vastness of the cosmos. And there's nothing like him. He created everything. And I only use him because we have problems with pronouns in English. Yes, as you may know, we have problems with pronouns in English. But he and she, huwa and hiya, are the only pronouns in Arabic. And so most of the time, they don't mean anything like biological gender, right? وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا, by the sun and her brightness, and by the moon as he follows her. And this doesn't mean that the sun is a female creature or that the moon is a male creature. It's everything in the Arabic language is either huwa or hiya, which translates to he or she. Okay, the symphonic Quran. The rhythm of the chaconne is in the Quran. Um, وَالْمُرْسَلَاتِ عُرْفًا فَالْعَاصِفَاتِ عَصْفًا وَالنَّاشِرَاتِ نَشْرًا فَالْفَارِقَاتِ فَرْقًا فَالْمُلْقِيَاتِ ذِكْرًا عُذْرًا أَوْ نُذْرًا إِنَّمَا تُوعَدُونَ لَوَاقِعٌ. Those are people would say verses. I prefer to say ayat. Ayah is a singular, means sign, from the Quran, the 77th surah. People would say chapter, but it's a surah is a word I prefer to use, but it's called in the Quran itself. But that rhythm, bum, 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 that's a variant. That's one of the variants of the rhythm of the chaconne. Um, uh, I could go on, but at any rate, um, wow, a comparative study of the Bible and the Quran. That's something I started back in '95. And this may sound paranoid, but I think I must have offended somebody, and my life just went to pieces. Uh, so those are things that I've done that, I just have this thought, I'm doing something that the powers that be don't like. So, I discovered Harvard is a scheme, and I was actually working. I was talking to the white guys that were my Harvard classmates, talking to them about the world. The Vietnam War was going on, and nobody wanted to be drafted. So I'm talking to these guys about the order of the world. I had read Amiri Baraka, or he was known as Leroy Jones at the time, a blues people, and that had just boom, my mind just went there, went, that was the beginning of a whole new life for me. And so I'm telling these guys about what the world is all about. And some of them actually, changed their point of view, went home, and, a fellow told me he went home. A couple of fellows went home, told me they enlightened their fathers. And one fellow at one point during my senior year, this sophomore comes up to me in the dining hall and thanks me. And what does he thank me? I didn't even remember talking to the fellow ever. But he thanked me for opening up his mind. He had gone somewhere in the upper Midwest and demonstrated and gotten arrested and thrown in jail. And he's thanking me. I'm just running my mouth, but he's thanking me for opening him up. And so, despite all that, I actually went to graduate school at Harvard. I skipped the master's by accident. Another story. But at any rate, and so Harvard was paying me. We never paid them anything. My parents, me, they were paying me. I was a graduate prize fellow, and they were paying me enough money to live on. I paid no tuition or anything like that. But it looks like I'm going to go over 30 minutes. But inshallah, but Allah willing, I'll finish uh, soon. Uh, but yeah, I'd gotten tired of Harvard and white people and everything. And I moved to Roxbury, which ironically, my dad was born in Roxbury. That's not why I moved. Roxbury is to Boston what Harlem is to New York, and I moved there and actually discovered that I didn't really have a life with other African Americans, which is another story. Uh, but I did live there, and uh, and so I was trying to get away from the whole thing. Like Harvard said, their purpose was to preserve Western civilization. What that translates to is that their purpose is to preserve European, so-called white people, domination of the planet. You know, this started about 5 centuries ago. The Europeans moved out of Europe, went everywhere, conquering, stealing, enslaving, and exterminating. My estimate is that altogether Europeans exterminated something like 200 million people, right? North and South America, Australia, the Congo, exterminated people. So anyway, they came to dominate the world. And even if you look at China, supposedly China is free of European domination, but their economic system, their government system, what is it called? It's called communism. Where did communism come from? It came from Europeans, right? I wish they would go back to Confucianism. That would be a vast improvement. But, Allah is the best planner. But at any rate, we are living in the world of European domination. And so, Western civilization, the Greeks were students of the Egyptians. Uh, and then that ancient civilization collapsed, not only Egypt, but Greeks and Rome. And it was the Muslims who came along and picked up the banner of civilization. And they shouldn't have tried to conquer everybody. They shouldn't have tried to conquer anybody. But that wasn't Muhammad's idea. 29 years after the passing of Muhammad, the Muslims came under leadership that was not following Muhammad at all. They saw it as an opportunity for wealth and power. And so the Muslims have not gotten back on the right track since then. They have not. They're not actually following Muhammad. There's a website, very excellent, helpful website for me in terms of getting background information on the Qur'an. But they constantly referring to Muhammad as the holy prophet Muhammad. Now, Muhammad actually said, "Ana basharun mithlukum." I can quote his exact words, "Ana basharun mithlukum." That means I am an ordinary person like all of you. He was not. He didn't walk up. People didn't have to call him Rasulullah or Nabi Allah, messenger of Allah or prophet of Allah. They could just call him by his name, Muhammad. And so this YouTube channel is called My Name is Lester. Because, I've been called terrible things, but, among the wonderful things, supposedly, that I've been called is doctor this, doctor that. Well, why? To me, Muhammad was the most illustrious person in history. Okay? And he was called Muhammad. And he and his followers didn't wear special hats, the kufis and everything. They wore robes because that's the way people in Arabia dressed. They didn't look different from people who were not Muslims. So, the Muslims have gone off on a different track. Imam this and Sheikh that and Ayatollah this and all of that. That's not what Muhammad established. And he certainly did not establish that people should go out and conquer people. He fought people who were trying to destroy his community. If you study the history, you know that the big battles of Badr and Uhud and the Battle of the Trench, they were all fought right near Medina, where the Muslims were living. Now, if they were trying to conquer the world, why would the battles be fought there? No, they were fought there because the enemies of Muhammad and his movement went up to Medina. It's like 200 miles from Mecca. They went up to Medina to try to wipe out the Muslims. Okay, so that's why Muhammad was fighting. He wasn't trying to conquer people. But then, conquering became so, conquering in the sense of defeating your enemy became so successful that after Muhammad passed, the people came along who said, hey, wow, we got this thing going, you know. But at any rate, that's something else I want to talk about. And the last thing, hopefully, I will mention is I'm working on a memoir called Tales from the Crypt. And what it is, I've already written a section of it. So you can look up Tales from the Crypt on my blog. My blog is My Name is Lester. Um, Tales from the Crypt. Um, and it's a memoir about my experiences with Elijah Muhammad's Nation of Islam. And I call it that because after the passing of Elijah Muhammad, there were other groups, other organizations that called themselves by that name, most notably Louis Farrakhan. Um, that is not the same organization. The organization that was the Nation of Islam changed its name to American Muslim Mission, uh, and then it was dissolved officially and legally in 1985. So, Farrakhan's organization is a different organization. But my experiences with Elijah Muhammad's Nation of Islam, let me just say this because I say terrible things about that group, that organization. But I believe that Elijah Muhammad was, they call him the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. I believe that he was honorable, that he was sincere. He was misguided, terribly misguided, but he believed what he was teaching his followers. And I will say this, what was being taught in the Nation of Islam under Elijah Muhammad was not Islam. Okay? So we can talk about that. Why wasn't it Islam? What are the criteria by which we determine whether a whale is a fish? you know, is a whale a fish or is it not? So at any rate, there are other things that I would love to discuss, but that's what I'm talking about. I don't know if anybody has heard this, and I'm hoping that I will be able to save it and share it. But I'm planning to talk again at 7:30 this evening, and hopefully there will be people who will join in at 7:30, and if not, I'll do it again. Tomorrow, the next day, until I can't do it no more. Those of you who have joined or tried to join, um, thank you for showing up, and hopefully I will do better as I continue to do this thing here. Okay, so uh, may Allah be with you, and thank you for showing up.